This is Global Order. I'm Hindol Sengupta. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome a special guest today, Commodore Anil Jai Singh. Commodore Jai Singh has a particular, expertise which we haven't discussed enough on the Global Order platform. He is an expert on India's submarine capability. And of course, we know that this has been relentlessly in the news. Most recently, talk about a third nuclear powered submarine being inducted, being tested. We don't know for sure entirely. And, this, of course, completes India's famed nuclear triad that, in a sense, the country has been waiting for a long time. So I invited Commodore Anil Jai Singh to talk about all of these things because very little is known about this subject, at least in public domain. And perhaps he could throw light on India's capabilities, including, remember, getting the nuclear submarine also enhances India's second strike capability. Sir, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. It's indeed a pleasure, Dr. Sengupta, to be on your show. And I was quite looking forward to it after we established contact. And thank you very much for inviting me today.
Thank you for your time, sir. I want to begin by asking you would have, of course, spotted the news that a third nuclear capable submarine has now been inducted into India's naval forces. Talk to us a little bit to begin with on your reflections on that news and what it means for the Indian Navy.
But submarines are basically of three types. I'll just give a very brief introduction. Submarines are fundamentally of three types. We have the conventional diesel-electric submarines, which India has 16 of them at the moment, and we're looking at further enhancing that capability with air-independent propulsion-equipped conventional submarines. If there's time, I'll explain that subsequently.
Please, you can go ahead right now also.
Then we have the nuclear attack submarines, what are known as SSNs. These are nuclear-powered, but conventionally propelled, nuclear-propelled, but conventionally armed. And then, of course, we have the nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines, which are called SSBNs, which are of course the ultimate in in any kind of warfare. But fundamentally, the SSBN is not a war-fighting platform. It's a strategic platform. It's a deterrent capability that it really highlights. So the submarine you mentioned, or the submarine about which you mentioned about the third submarine, is in the category of the SSBNs. You would recall that around 2016-17, we commissioned the INS Arihant.
Right.
INS Arihant was the first SSBN commissioned in India. And it's a great technological marvel because an SSBN is probably one of the most complex platforms ever built. It's akin to building a spacecraft, probably a little more complicated than that as well. And we are only the sixth nation in the world to have built our own. The other five are the five permanent members of the Security Council: US, UK, France, China, and Russia. So it's a great technological achievement. It took many years to come, but that is expected. Nobody is going to share that kind of technology with anybody else. So you have to develop everything on our own. We're very lucky that we have a very robust civilian nuclear program, atomic program. So that helped a lot in understanding the complexities of nuclear power, nuclear propulsion, miniaturizing a reactor to fit into a submarine, all those things. So that helped a lot. And so once Arihant was commissioned, that was really a very effective technology demonstrator as far as India was concerned. And in 2018, you would also recollect, Arihant went for her first operational deployment. She went on a deterrent patrol, which was then, the Prime Minister felicitated the crew. The crew came to Delhi, met the Prime Minister. And, we said, now we'll never be subject to nuclear blackmail because now we have this capability, which was actually the completion of the nuclear triad. The nuclear triad is basically a land-based capability, an air-based capability, and a sea-based capability. Now, the advantage the sea-based capability brings to a nuclear triad is that while the land-based capability and the air-based capability are vulnerable to being preemptively neutralized by the enemy if they know your exact locations or they can shoot down your aircraft, nobody knows where the nuclear submarine is. It could be anywhere underwater. And so a country which launches a preemptive doesn't know where the retaliatory strike is going to come from. So our entire nuclear equation was based on an effective sea-based deterrent, because our nuclear doctrine very clearly has no first use as is one of its cornerstones. So if you have a no first use policy, it means you have to have the capability to deter anybody from launching a first strike against you, for which you need a very effective second strike capability. That means a retaliatory capability. Till we didn't have a sea-based nuclear response platform, we were vulnerable. So Arihant achieved that we can now operate, maintain, and sustain a nuclear ballistic missile submarine at sea. Now, what Arihant actually proved was not that we can fire a missile at anybody from a nuclear ballistic missile from sea. That is, of course, very much the case. It proved, more importantly, the complex command and control mechanism required to launch that missile from that submarine at sea somewhere, hundreds of miles out at sea, hundreds of meters below the water, at a particular point of time, when maybe either there has been a nuclear attack against the country, or the country decided to go preemptive because of an imminent nuclear attack. So the precision of that has to be a command given by the Prime Minister in Delhi at the new National Command Authority to launch a missile by a submarine somewhere in the depths of the oceans, requires a very sort of intricate and complex command and control network. So more than the fact that we had a missile which could be launched, which can be practiced anyway, you don't need to send a submarine out to sea to sort of practice that if you don't want to. It proved that we have the capability to be able to deploy a SSBN at sea on a deterrent patrol. That was a very important milestone that was achieved in this entire program. But one SSBN does not a nuclear deterrent make, in a way, of manner of speaking. We also knew that there's a second boat being built called Arighat, which was similar to Arihant, but with a better missile being developed for it, a longer range missile, because it's also important to have the right kind of weapon for a deterrent. You can't go very close to enemy's waters to launch a missile. You should be able to launch it from far away. Standoff ranges where a retaliatory attack can't come from an enemy's aircraft or another submarine or anything like that. So Arighat has been under construction now for some time. She's been undergoing extensive sea trials. I don't know whether she's commissioned or not, because these things are pretty hush-hush. I assume if she's not commissioned, she will get commissioned soon. But what we saw recently was a satellite picture or whatever of a third SSBN called the S4. It's called the S4. Now, the S4 is going to be a larger SSBN than the S2 and the S3, which are Arihant and Arighat. And now from that picture, it's quite evident that it's at a very advanced stage of construction. It is not yet commissioned. It has not yet gone to sea, to the best of my knowledge. But it is very much more or less built. And now it will go through the usual process of sea trials, harbor trials, factory acceptance tests, missile firings, weapon firings, working up of the crew, the routine operational maintenance cycle, etc., etc. And she will ultimately enter service. Now, why is it important to have 3? Actually, an ideal number of SSBNs the Navy should have are 4. So we also have something called the S4 Star, which is under construction right now. So India is at the moment looking for a force of 4 to 5 SSBNs. And why do you need 4 SSBNs? You need 4 SSBNs because the credibility of your second strike capability is only when you can have a submarine at sea on deployment at any given time. If the enemy knows that you have a limited number of submarines, he'll know when that submarine is in harbor. And if that submarine is in harbor, you have no second strike capability. So for that second strike capability to be credible, you have to be able to have a submarine at sea at any given time, 24/7, 365 days of the year. That can only be achieved optimally with at least 4 submarines. One on the way to patrol, one returning from patrol, one on patrol, and one maybe in refit or maintenance in harbor. So if you notice, Britain has 4 submarines, France has 4 submarines. Of course, the Russians, Chinese, and the Americans have much. Even the Chinese started with 3 and built up to 4. So 4 is considered the minimum number of SSBNs to have what they call continuous at sea deterrence, CASD. Which means that then it is only then that your second strike capability from your sea vector is credible. That missile can come anytime from anywhere, 24/7 by 365. So that is why you have heard about the 3rd boat and you've heard about the 4th boat. And that is why it becomes important for the second strike capability to be credible. I hope that answers your question.
You were also going to explain, some details about the various classes of submarines we have, sir. Perhaps you would want to reflect on that before I go on.
Okay. So fundamentally, like I said, there are 3 basic classes of submarines. There are the SSBNs, which I mentioned, which I spoke to you about just now. Then there are the SSNs. The SSNs are nuclear propelled, but conventionally armed. So the advantage they have is they can do high speeds. They have unlimited endurance. So they're a very, very effective underwater asset any navy has, particularly a blue water navy, because an SSN can keep pace with the enemy's carrier battle group also. So if the enemy's carrier battle group knows there's an SSN somewhere, it greatly restricts the carrier battle group's ability to operate freely in the oceans. There's always that niggling doubt in the commanding officer's mind or the admiral's mind that there could be an SSN around here. So the SSN, I would say, is today the most effective naval weapon platform anywhere in the world. It is the SSN. Again, 5 countries are operating SSNs at the moment, the 5 permanent members of the Security Council. You would recall that India had leased a submarine from Russia called INS Chakra.
Right. Yes.
The first Chakra came in 1988 for 3 years, went back in 1991. The second Chakra came in 2012 and went back in N21 because the lease was expiring in 22. And there was talk of a third submarine being leased in 2025. Now, whether that happens or not, I don't know. But there was talk 4 or 5 years ago of a third submarine being also leased for 10 years. So the fundamental reason for us leasing an SSN over so many years was to learn how to operate these very complex platforms, both for our SSBN crews as well as for our future SSN crews. So India is an aspiring blue water navy. We are a blue water navy aspiring to great power status. If we have to have that great power status and a credible blue water capability, we need SSNs. So about 4 or 5 years ago, the government gave a sort of approval to that India, yes, we should have SSNs, 6 SSNs. However, that program is not taken off because the formal approval has not yet come to build 6 SSNs. It may be 3, it may be 4, it may be 6, we don't know. But sooner rather than later, I would say that that approval should come and we should start building our first SSN, because an SSN is also an equally complex platform like the SSBN. And it could take, for a Navy trying to build it for the first time, or for a country trying to build it for the first time, it could take anything from 10 to 12 years. Even navies which have been operating nuclear submarines for the last 50, 60 years take almost 7 to 10 to 12 years to really operationalize a new class of nuclear submarines. The Brits, the Astute class, which is a very advanced SSN, the 6th boat or 7th boat of that is still not commissioned. And that program has been going on for the last 20 odd years. So it is a very complex capability. Other than India, Brazil is aspiring to build SSNs. And okay, I'll come back to the SSN program a little later. Let me come now to the 3rd class of submarine, which are the conventional diesel electric submarines, which are the bread and butter submarines of most navies in the world. India has got 16 of them at the moment. These submarines are powered by diesel generators, which charge batteries, electric batteries, lead acid batteries, which propel a motor, electric motor, which propels the submarine. So that is basically the principle of operation. But the limitation these have is that the batteries slowly keep discharging as you are propelling. So you have to keep coming up to, we don't come to surface anymore, but we come up to something called snorkeling depth, where you raise a mast out of the water to take fresh air inside for the diesel generators to run, which then charge the batteries, which then are again used to operate the motors. So every 2 or 3 days, the cycle has to be repeated. Now, when you have to repeat a cycle, it is every 2 or 3 days, your submarine is vulnerable. For those 2, 3, 4 hours, whatever time it has to expose a mast for taking fresh air, is vulnerable to the enemy's ships, to the enemy's aircraft and all. So the aim is to reduce this period as much as possible. This we call the indiscretion rate, that the submarine is indiscreet for this period of time. So to sort of address this limitation, we now have something called air independent propulsion, AIP. You must have heard the term, it's in the newspapers, because India's next class of submarine is going to be an AIP submarine. Air independent propulsion is, there are various systems. There are fuel cell systems, there are reverse, Stirling engine systems, etc., which basically store hydrogen and oxygen and then use that to charge the batteries. So the submarine doesn't have to snorkel every 2 or 3 days. It has to probably snorkel once in 14 or 15 days, which greatly reduces its vulnerability to being detected by enemy platforms. So now most modern navies are going in for conventional submarines with AIP capability. India is developing its own AIP system, an indigenous AIP system being done by DRDO, which will, once it is ready, which could take 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now, will be fitted on board the Scorpion class, which are the submarines that have recently been built in India with French collaboration. However, the next class of submarine that we're looking for, which is the project is called the P75I, which must be reading about in the papers nowadays. Trials are going on and all. We've got the Germans are in it, the Spaniards are in it. has to be a submarine with an AIP system. That's the fundamental requirement that has been given for these submarines, is that whatever India builds with foreign support will be an AIP-equipped submarine. So India is also getting into that league. Otherwise, all the navies around us are operating AIP submarines. Singapore's got AIP, South Korea, Japan, China, even Pakistan. We still don't have an AIP-equipped submarine in the Indian Navy. So that is the, and an SSN is huge. It's not only the cost of the submarine, it's the cost of the entire ecosystem that you have to create around safe operation of a nuclear-powered submarine. That costs a lot of money. So that is why most navies cannot afford SSNs. This is basically the preserve of large blue water navies. Coming back to the SSN program.
Yes.
I told you about the Indian program.
Yes.
So the most recent development has been AUKUS, which you mentioned in passing, the trilateral that has been signed between Australia, UK, and the US to provide Australia nuclear submarine capability over the next 10, 15, 20 years, basically as a counter to China's rise. So that is the most recent SSN program that has now begun, is AUKUS. If you want, maybe later I can tell you more about it if there's time. There's a whole plan in that. So that's basically the 3 types of submarines, and that is why it's very important that if you have SSBNs, you must have a very credible second strike capability. And for that, you need 3, well, not ideally 3, ideally 4 submarines. But if, cost constraints are there or any other constraints are there, then 3 is just about possible. But anything less than that, you're not credible.
Let's talk about this second strike capability now, sir. When Pulwama happened and India chose to send those jets across the line of control into Pakistan to bomb terrorist camps within Pakistan, in the world of international relations, this whole stability-instability paradox of a nuclear warfare got disturbed heavily by that decision. But many people speculated that, in a sense, India was also testing by that act essentially its second strike capability and the deterrence afforded, in a sense, by its second strike capability, trying to understand whether the enemy, in a sense, really believes its second strike capability. At that time, if I'm not mistaken, we had only the Arihant, and that was just one nuclear submarine. Talk to me a little bit about how you see that incident. And now that we are coming close to getting 3 nuclear submarines, where does that put us? I know you said that 4 is the ideal number, if not more. But if we get 3, where are we placed at this juncture?
So I'll answer your second part first. 3 will give us tremendous amount of nuclear strategic capability. There's no doubt about that. Okay, it may not be ideally 4, but even 3 is a substantial capability. And, the Indian Armed Forces structuring even today is somewhat the conventional forces are quite detached from the nuclear strategic element. But your nuclear capability does have a bearing on what kind of conventional forces you need, because you have an inherent deterrence capability and an inherent retaliatory capability. So you can afford to call your enemy's bluff, if I may put it that way. For example, you mentioned Pakistan and Pulwama and Balakot.
Yeah.
Pakistan has been threatening us with tactical nuclear weapons for the last so many years, because they seem to have.
That's why, in a sense, many people believe, even though it was never spelled out, that India built the so-called Cold Star Doctrine.
Exactly. Yeah, in a way. So Pakistan has been threatening us. Their ministers have made statements like nuclear weapons are not meant for showcases and things like that, and are meant to be used and all. But I think, any sane nation would think many times before it embarks on anything as adventurous as a nuclear strike, whether with a tactical nuclear weapon or with a huge ballistic missile, whether it's taking out a population center or taking out, let's say, an aircraft carrier at sea with a tactical nuclear weapon. Because the retaliatory strike that will come could be of any magnitude. So to think that I just fired a tactical nuclear weapon into the open ocean, no civilians died, so nobody's going to hit me back, is a fallacy. And I think the confidence India has in its own retaliatory strike capability gave it the confidence to do what it did in Balakot, because it knows that no matter what it does, it is not going to face a nuclear attack from Pakistan. That is my reading. Because Pakistan also, for all its ills and whatever its other thing, its political instability, etc., there would be sane voices there which will sort of control the more the less sane voices on nuclear attack. So now as far as Balakot per se was concerned, yes, that was like a second strike. I mean, second strike need not necessarily be nuclear. It can be conventional as well. So long as you have the capacity and the capability to hit hard, hit back hard, it's a retaliatory second strike capability. They did something, we hit them back very hard. They tried to retaliate again, but they knew that it wasn't going to go anywhere. Of course, this was one incident. It was called a surgical strike. In an actual scenario, it could be quite different. But frankly speaking, I think, India's nuclear posture will be more China-oriented than Pakistan-oriented, because I don't think that will always go. And if it is effective against China, it will be effective against Pakistan also. So that's kind of, there's no doubt about that. So from that perspective, second strike capability gives you the confidence that nobody is going to try a nuclear misadventure with me, because I have this very credible capability to hit him back as much harder. And, our nuclear doctrine talks about two things: no first use, which I mentioned, and maximum, whatever they call it, maximum retaliatory strike.
Yes.
We've made it very clear: if you hit us, we'll hit you with everything we've got. Now,
let's talk a little bit about China, sir, because you mentioned China. When we are at the status where we will get a third nuclear submarine, as the oceans are heating up with China's aggression, in a sense, where are we placed vis-a-vis China at the moment, and what more should we do to counter China?
Look, China. So the third SSBN or the fourth SSBN when we have will give us a credible second strike, which is very important in India's posture against China, because they must know that we have this capability now. They have it, and if we have it, it's a mutual deterrent against each other. As far as their maritime capability goes, otherwise goes. The Chinese PLA Navy is growing at a remarkable pace. No other Navy in contemporary history has grown at the pace at which the PLA Navy is growing. They're commissioning almost 15 to 20 major warships every year. Aircraft carriers, large amphibious ships, Type 055 destroyers, which are 12,000-ton destroyers, 3 to 4 nuclear submarines a year. So it's unprecedented, this expansion. They're adding almost an Indian Navy to their Navy every 6 or 7 years, if I may put it that way. And everyone is watching that with great concern, because already the PLA Navy is the largest Navy in the world. It already has 350 ships. No other Navy has 350 ships. But it still lacks capability vis-a-vis the US Navy. US Navy's got, 11 aircraft carriers, each of 100,000 tons. China's got 2. Now the third one, Fujian, is building. So there is no comparison between the two at the moment. And similarly, notwithstanding its rapid expansion, it still does not have the capacity or the capability to take on India in the Indian Ocean. And that is why you will notice over 4 years that this whole Galwan standoff has happened.
That's right.
Where we've come to some very dangerous brinkmanship from their side. They have stayed clear of the Indian Navy at sea. They have not got into any skirmish with the Indian Navy anywhere in the Indian Ocean over the last 4 years. China maintains a permanent naval presence in the Indian Ocean of 6 to 7 ships, because they say anti-piracy, protecting our trade, etc., etc., etc. And they also now have a naval base at Djibouti.
That's right.
Which is now being expanded to accommodate an aircraft carrier. But we cannot sort of get complacent about the fact that we are more than a match for China in the Indian Ocean. We are more than a match, far more than a match for them in the Indian Ocean. Because 7 to 8 to 10 years from now, if this Chinese naval expansion continues the way it is, and there's no reason why it will not, because China's entire premise of global domination by 2049 is on being a global dominant maritime power. They're using the typical Mahanian strategy of global domination through maritime control, sea control. So my guesstimate is that by 2032, China will have one permanent carrier battle group based in the Indian Ocean. When they have 4 carriers or 5 carriers, there will be one over here, which will operate from Djibouti or wherever it operates from, accompanied by 1 or 2 SSNs or 2 or 3 SSNs. Now, this will be a substantial force in the Indian Ocean, where India has never really been challenged by anybody to that extent, never ever. The Indian Navy is quite the largest, most preeminent naval force in the Indian Ocean, and we're doing a great job as a preferred security provider, as first responder, etc., etc. But the fact is that there is a Chinese Navy which is lurking, which is gradually expanding its footprint westward from its own mainland towards the Indian Ocean. More than what it's doing with its Navy is what it is doing otherwise. Its Belt and Road Initiative, where it is investing in very strategic ports all along the Indian Ocean, starting from Hambantota, Bangladesh, Myanmar, various places, islands. So these, though are on paper, they're only ports and they're not naval bases. But what prevents a Chinese ship from berthing there and getting refueled there or rearmed there? So that is what is more worrying. For example,
That's exactly what happened at Hambantota. I mean, this is exactly the controversy. What you just spelled out exactly is what happened at Hambantota in Sri Lanka.
And what is now of concern is that, so China's military diplomacy is very good. They leverage their military capability and the economic strength to sort of assert themselves wherever they go. So in 2017, they gave Bangladesh always wanted to be a submarine operating navy. Every small navy aspires to be a submarine operating navy one day. So Bangladesh got 2 Ming-class submarines from Bangladesh. Now, Ming-class submarines are very old submarines. They were modernized for Bangladesh, but they're not really, premier top-of-the-line war-fighting platforms because of the age. But based on the fact that they got those 2 submarines, they've now built a submarine base in Bangladesh called BNS Sheikh Hasina, which was commissioned in March last year. Now, that base can accommodate 6 submarines. I don't think Bangladesh in the next 50 years will have 6 submarines. So what they've got now is a place where their submarines can come, if they're allowed to, and I don't think Bangladesh will be able to stop them from coming there. They can refuel there, they can get basic maintenance done. Because China's biggest submarine limitation right now is its distance is the Chinese mainland distance from the Indian Ocean. For a submarine to come from, let's say, Hainan or any of these places, I mean, even Cochin is about 8,000 kilometers away. She has to come, they have to come through the straits, they have to come to these ports. Now, if they don't have a port where they can go, they can be monitored from the time they enter the Indian Ocean. That means their position is compromised. But if they have a port which they can go to after entering the Indian Ocean, they head straight to, let's say, to Bangladesh, to BNS Sheikh Hasina, or they head straight to Godar. After that, where that submarine gets deployed, we'll never know. She'll refuel, she'll rebirth, she'll get a ration, she'll get a weapon, she'll get whatever. And then she'll operate in the Indian Ocean like any other submarine operating in the Indian Ocean. So that is equally a matter of concern for us. So the Bay of Bengal, which was like an Indian lake all these years, is now no longer going to be an Indian lake a few years from now, because there'll always be the suspicion of a lurking Chinese submarine. So these are things we have to be concerned about. Similarly, they're giving Pakistan 8 submarines. Now, why would a country of Pakistan's size with a 300 or 400 kilometer long coastline require 8 submarines? They already have 3. 11 submarines for that coastline is huge by any stretch of imagination. If they have 11 submarines and they can put 5 or 6 at sea at any given time, that's a huge capability Pakistan will have in submarine capability. It is because probably at some point of time, Pakistan will be used to contain India, to put pressure on India, their two-front sort of strategy. So China, while it's building up its navy, is also building the sort of structure or the architecture in the Indian Ocean to be able to support that navy when it operates over here. Now, that is something we have to be concerned about. And I think we are concerned. These have all these issues have been flagged by various chiefs of naval staff. The government is aware of it. You will see, ship programs are running scheduled. We have our challenges. We can only allocate that much money in no more to defense. We've got huge development challenges. And navies are not a zero-sum game. It's not submarine versus submarine or aircraft carrier versus aircraft carrier. It's about in your area of operation, what do you need? What capability and capacity do you need to be able to deter the other guy from doing what he wants to do? That should be good enough. So if the cost of if the attrition for the other guy is going to be so high, he'll think it's not worth my while to go and try and take on even if it's a smaller navy. So that's how naval forces generally operate.
Glad you brought in Bangladesh and it described this entire rather alarming scenario to us, because that brings me to the last part of my conversation with you today, where I want to focus on India's plans on building a base in Nicobar Islands. This is being discussed again and again. Some of it, of course, is civilian, but of course, a large part of it is military. And you and I both know that, China always used to worry that, a large part of his of its strait goes through the, its great Malacca dilemma, goes through the Malacca Straits. And in order to safeguard that and, ensure that no one can choke that, it's trying to find all kinds of other routes. In fact, many people argue that its entire CPEC is one part of it is essentially to balance this. And that's why Gwadar is so important to it, and which is one of the reasons why India has gone ahead with Chabar in Iran and so on and so forth. But talk to us about your assessments of the need for this strategic base and development in the Great Nicobar Islands, because as you know, there's already a lot of environmental pushback and so on and so forth. But from what you just described, and many other strategic thinkers have described, this is a real this is of great importance, strategic importance to us. And if we don't do this today, there will be a great price and grave price to pay for in the future. So talk to us about your assessment of the need for this project.
Well, actually, we already have a fairly large base in Port Blair. We have the Andaman Nicobar Command base there. Now, if you remember the history of Andaman Nicobar Command, it came up soon after the Kargil War because there was a need felt that we need a theatre command organization. So the Andaman Nicobar was created from the erstwhile Fortress Command at Andaman Nicobar Islands as an experimental theatre command to see how do theatre commands operate, how are they structured. And it was considered that, because it has all three elements, it has maritime, it has land, it has air, this is the right place. At that time, lots of countries expressed concern, saying that, India is expanding and militarization of the Bay of Bengal and this, that, and all that. So to allay their fears and their apprehensions, the Indian government sort of didn't say it in so many words, but sort of conveyed the message that, look, we are just trying out something. We are not here to increase our force levels or be a threat in the region. And so we never really increased our force levels in Port Blair into what a command should look like. The force levels remain more or less what they were prior to the command coming up, which I felt at that time people believed was not the right thing to do, because they said if you have to have a command, then you must operate like a command. But that besides, I mean, there must have been good reason to do whatever they did. But Port Blair now is a very active command. It's a very active naval base. It has a full-fledged dockyard. We have lots of air bases in the Andaman Nicobar Islands. We have Diglipur, we have Campbell Bay, we have Great Nicobar, we have a whole lot of them. Now earlier they used to operate small little Dorniers. Now they can operate P-8I aircraft. They can operate Sukhoi fighters. They can operate all kinds of aircraft now, So we have ramped up our capabilities there considerably. I know this base in the Great Nicobar Island, not the base, but the infrastructure, the tourist port infrastructure in Great Nicobar Islands is coming in for a lot of flack, particularly from no other reason except for the environmental concerns. Nobody is questioning the strategic importance of that. They're just saying we've got to do it the right way, because let's be honest, that area is very fragile. The marine ecosystem there is extremely fragile. Today from Port Blair or any of the Andaman Nicobar Islands, if I want to bring a shell of even this size, I'm not allowed to do it. If it's found in my baggage, I'll have a criminal case against me. That's how careful they are. Now here you're talking about removing, trees and the foliage and the mangroves, etc., etc. But that besides, from a strategic perspective, yes, if it's only taken that way, it is an important thing. We must have a presence there. It may be a civilian presence, but a presence is a presence because you create an ecosystem. There'll be marine tourism, there'll be ships coming, there'll be ships going, there'll be a port, there'll be security, there'll be police, there'll be, all that will be there. And obviously there will be Navy also, or there'll be Coast Guard, there'll be some naval element. And like you said, China's Malacca dilemma is very, very real for China. They know that we have the capacity to, may not be choke the complete trade because there were the Lombok Straits and the Sunda Straits to go through, but we can substantially constrain them economically. And yes, that's exactly the reason why Gwadar was developed, why the CPEC was developed, because China was trying to find routes to the Chinese mainland without having to go through the Malacca Strait. So it was Gwadar for the CPEC and Kuk Fu through Myanmar. But these are not, one is still not sure of the viability of these projects. Because as somebody said that, one tanker of oil would require 20,000 lorries going through all kinds of rough terrain all the way to the Chinese mainland. But okay, in an emergency, perhaps they'll do it. Maybe they'll have pipelines or whatever. So certainly China is concerned about the Malacca dilemma. Certainly India holds the trump card with its location where it is, we straddle that entire sea lane from where all the traffic passes. We've been really blessed by maritime geography, which is China's curse actually. Maritime geography is its curse, it's our blessing. Now we have to capitalize and leverage this blessing to ensure that we have the maritime wherewithal to remain the predominant maritime power in the Indian Ocean, no matter what the opposition. Because I believe that the future great game contestation that's going to happen, the great power contestation that's going to happen, is not going to happen in the South China Sea. That will be Taiwan and South China Sea and all. But when it comes to global domination, the South China Sea is one little pocket of water somewhere in the east. What China needs is sea space if it has to dominate the sea. That sea space it gets in the Indian Ocean. It needs access to the Atlantic. That access to the Atlantic comes from the Indian Ocean. So eventually this great power contestation is going to happen in the Indian Ocean and not in the South China Sea. And when that happens, one of China's main concerns will be how to contain India, because India is viewed as a pro-US partner by them. It is at a time like this where India, being the preeminent maritime power in the Indian Ocean, should have the capacity and the capability to, if not shape, at least influence the outcomes. Otherwise, we'll end up getting influenced by the outcomes, and that is something that is not acceptable at all. So I think from that perspective, it's very important that India develops the right capability, the right capacity to meet those contingencies, maybe 10, 15 years from now, whenever it is.
It's been a fascinating conversation, sir. Thank you very much for the detailed explanation on India's challenges and opportunities and capabilities. No doubt there are exciting days ahead. And indeed, in order for India to maintain the ocean as India's ocean, so to speak, the Indian Ocean, much more effort needs to be put in. I thank you for your time. Thanks very much indeed.
No, thank you. It was a very interesting conversation, and thank you for all the very, very perceptive questions. I really enjoyed answering them. Thank you. And we hope to do something together maybe later, some other time.
Absolutely, sir. No doubt we will have you many, many times in the future on Global Order. We have an audience in more than 130 countries. And, it's been a great pleasure listening to you. Thank you once again.
My pleasure entirely, Dr. Sengupta. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me on your show.